What's up, Podbees students? Today we're going to be talking about elasticity, both of supply and demand. We're going to focus on demand first, but think about elasticity. Think about a rubber band that's really easy to stretch out, okay? That rubber band is elastic, right? But then think of, let's say, a rubber hose, okay? And you can stretch it, but it's really hard, okay, to stretch it out. That band there is what we call inelastic. All right, so think about you want more elastic waistbands around Thanksgiving time in case you want to eat more. But you want more inelastic stuff if you want to keep things tighter, okay? So instead of our hand stretching, now when we talk about it with supply and demand, it's the price that stretches things out. And what we know is that with a change of price, there's going to be a change in the quantity demand and quantity supplied. But the answer is how much, all right? And what we know is that certain items, when we have an increase and decrease in price, certain items have more of a response to that increase and decrease in price. So focusing on demand for now, all right, let's say you have a product and you want to make more money. So you say, well, let's increase the price. Well, in all reality, we don't really know if we're going to make more money if we raise the price. Okay, what we do know is that if we increase the price, the quantity demand will decrease. And because the quantity demand decreases, you could potentially make more money or less money depending on your elasticity of demand. All right, so let's take, for example, Kit Kat bars. Kit Kat has a lot of alternatives. So if they decide, you know what, we want to make more money, so we're going to increase our prices. The problem is that if you increase them enough, people might say, too expensive, I'm going to eat a Twix. All right. So they actually might lose more customers by increasing their prices and therefore losing more money. But if they have elastic demand and they lower their prices a bit, they could potentially make more because more people will want it. All right. And price times the quantity will equal your revenue. All right, so what we have here is that a change in price leads to a bigger percentage change in demand. So if you decreased your price, Kit Kat decreases their price, their quantity demand will increase more, and therefore they'll make more money. But let's take a product like insulin. People are going to pay whatever price that is charged for insulin because they need insulin to live. And this becomes an ethical issue in a lot of ways, all right, because we know that drug companies could increase their price to thousands of dollars and people will pay it because they need it. And so a lot of times government steps in to regulate in these situations. Therefore, you'd have a perfectly vertical and what we call perfectly inelastic demand curve. Doesn't matter the price, the quantity will be the same. Everybody who needs insulin to live will pay that particular price. So change in price will have little to do with how much people will buy. So price elasticity of demand measures the amount of quantity demand with the change of price. So inelastic demands means that consumers are not responsive to the change in price, and elastic demand means that consumers are responsive to the change in price. Okay, so let's take a couple or the four factors. So one is substitutes, the relative amount of substitutes. Cigarettes doesn't have a ton of substitutes, and it's highly addictive. Therefore, what ends up happening is we get an inelastic demand. That means you can raise the price of cigarettes to whatever, but if people are addicted, they're going to buy more of it. So inelastic demand is a lot of times what we see on addictive substances. Okay. Elastic demand we see on things that have a lot of substitutes. Okay. Soda has a lot of substitutes. If there's an increase in price in one soda, you might be willing to go buy a different soda if it's cheaper. People are brand loyal, and we can debate this a little bit, but we know this for sure, that if you really like Coke and you don't like Pepsi, you're not willing to go to that alternative, but we do know that if Coke lowers their price, you're going to buy more of it. Okay, that means you have elastic demand. Price relative to income. We know that a income can change and shift the demand curve, but it also makes certain items more inelastic. So for example, when they know that incomes are low, McDonald's knows that the demand for McDonald's is going to increase. Okay, but they also know that they probably don't have to change their prices very much. so they create more of an inelastic demand. Well, a nice steakhouse knows that if incomes are increasing, they can charge whatever, and they know that they have more inelastic demand depending on income levels in certain individuals. Luxury goods are elastic. Okay, so a thing like Rolex, we know that if they raise their prices, people buy way less of them. If they lower prices, people buy way more of them, which is a good indication of elastic demand. But things that are necessities like salt, salt is needed, and therefore people are going to be willing to pay the prices for necessity items. And then time to adjust to price change affects elasticity as well. So think about gasoline is very inelastic. That means whether the price is $4 or $2, people are going to demand about the same amount. But if it goes way up in price, it's going to be pretty inelastic, but over time, that elasticity will change. Okay, I drive a lot. If gas went up to $4, I might think, you know what? I need to buy a new car. But I don't just buy a new car right away. It takes a little bit of time in order for people to make those changes. All right. If the iPhone gets too expensive, you're not just going to change your habits and the types of phones and getting your Apple products. That takes a little bit of time. So time will adjust and change elasticity. And so what you see is the different slope of the different curves. More elastic would be more flat. More inelastic is vertical. So think I is a vertical letter. I is inelastic. So let's look at the supply side. Let's say you own the Mona Lisa. Okay, is your supply elastic or inelastic? Well, it would be perfectly inelastic. There's only one Mona Lisa. So depending on the price of any particular product or the demand, there's only one. So you can only supply one, and therefore you'd have a perfectly inelastic supply. But what if the only job in town is hiring and paying $12 an hour? Well, in this case, we're talking about the resource market, not the product market. But in this case, what you would see is that the supply is $12.50. So the price of what people are hiring at that particular price is going to be perfectly elastic. So elasticity of supply measures producers' sensitivity to the change in price. We know that producers are willing to produce more when prices increase, but how much kind of depends. So when producers are not responsive to the change in price, the supply is inelastic, and when producers are responsive to the change, the supply is elastic. All right. So the four factors in this. So first, think price and availability of resources. Remember fidget spinners? Very compatible, very easy to change what your factory is making to make more of that particular product. All right. However, a thing like apples take a long time for the tree to mature, and a lot of times it might take 2-3 years. So that really good apple that you get at the beginning of the year called the First Kiss, super popular, really expensive right now, but there's not a lot of available resources in order to get that. It takes time in order to grow those trees. So apples and bananas are very much, it takes time to mature those, and so the availability of resources are pretty low. But a thing like fidget spinners, when they got popular, it was easier for producers to change in that. Number of producers, there's a lot of t-shirt makers, right? So there's a number of producers that can increase the supply, and which makes it more elastic. So if a lot of different producers can produce the same item, it's a very elastic product that is being created. However, things that are rare, like antiques, end up being more inelastic because they're harder to come by, and you don't have as many producers. Technology can impact elasticity. So if your company or your product has a lot of technology and you just have to click a few buttons and you can make more, you're going to have more elastic supply. So producers can easily produce way more quantity with a growing technology. But let's say you make quality handmade items in which you've been studying and practicing for a long time. You're not going to be able to produce more just because there's more of a demand. All right. And government action can impact too. All right. So if high taxes might steer producers away from producing more items, you might not be willing to buy a beachfront hotel if you know the taxes are going to be high and therefore the the um, the profits are going to be lower. But if you're a farmer and you know that there's more subsidies in, let's say, growing wheat than growing corn, it's going to be easy for you to change that. So the ease in which you can create a product will make it more elastic, while the difficulty to make a product will make it more inelastic. And your curves will look like this.